When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They'd been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side. And they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter that Jesus is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. It is without a doubt the simple truth that Easter is the most important day for the followers of Jesus. You would think it's Christmas, but the truth of the matter is, it is Easter. And on this day, we sing hallelujahs and we talk about joy. But the truth is, we have to take a step back to talk just for a moment about the reality of the cross. Where does this joy come from? Because all of the resurrection stories begin with them being afraid, terrified. So what was the cross? We mentioned it earlier. A symbol of state-sanctioned torture. It was a way to keep the population under control. But that's not the whole story. We have to remember that Jesus ended up on the cross through a corruption of justice. It was a collusion between the religious and the political leadership. Deals done in the dark to make sure that they would maintain the status quo, even though the status quo was unjust. And then it was about a betrayal by a close friend. And by the time Jesus ends up on the cross, every single one of the disciples and the followers have left him, including the women, but they stand at a distance. All have abandoned him. So that by the time we get to joy and alleluia and talk about praise, I'm convinced that if we do not ground it in what happened, in that reality, that we aren't talking about the joy of Easter. In fact, I've come to the conclusion that Easter really isn't about joy at all. I think we need to think about Easter instead as hopeful defiance in the face of despair. I mean, think about it for a minute. The resurrection has come, and we've still got trouble in our lives. The money still runs out. Cancer still exists. We're still dealing with the societal structure in our own city, racism, militarism, inequality, state-sanctioned torture today, corruption. None of this went away at the resurrection. All we have to do is look at our own city to know that is true. So to be people who can authentically celebrate Easter with joy and thanksgiving, we've got to be honest about it. Otherwise, we're just pretending. I used to have a bumper sticker on the back of my car that said, "Pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will." Now, if any of you were a grad student at some point, I'm sure you know that that was a Marxist Italian writer who wrote that, but I've reclaimed that, just like Christians do all the time. It was this idea. I stumbled across it when I was reading his writing as an undergrad, and I loved this idea. It was about hopeful action with realistic vision. In other words, it's about what Christians are called to do. We're called to open our eyes, to look at the realities around us, acknowledge them, and then act in hope. Act as if. Act almost because things don't look the way they're supposed to. Although we could go the other way, which is to look at the world through rose-colored glasses, and then we numb ourselves because we know it's not that way. That's our choice on this day. And that's what's so scary about the empty tomb, because it requires of us some response. The truth is, none of this is all that radical to say. Look at how everyone responded to the news of Jesus showing up, from Mary to the disciples. No one responded to the news of Jesus' resurrection with joy. In fact, if you keep reading in the stories in Mark and Matthew and in John, they go and hide and lock the door because they're terrified. They respond with fear and disbelief. Later on, we'll learn about Thomas, who says, I don't believe it until I can stick my finger in the holes where the nails were. Pretty bold. And so they go away with fear and terror, and they choose not to say anything. But what we know is, by the virtue of us being here on this day, they finally said something. I've come to think that one of the best modern examples, and I'm going to murder his name and I apologize up front, is a guy by the name of Vedran Smailović. I won't try that again. Some of you might know that name. In 1992, he was living through the siege of Sarajevo. And he would go out in the rooms every day to play his cello. It's what he could do. That was his gift. That was his talent. And he knew in the midst of insanity, because they never thought it could happen. Of all the cities of the world, Sarajevo was a place of welcome and tolerance and unity. It wasn't going to happen there, but did. And what that shows us is that the places where we are able to cross boundaries in our lives at the bridge are very tenuous at best. So we're called to use our gifts like he did and go out and play. And I love this quote, and I hope you'll let me get away with it. He said that he did it basically to quote-unquote flip the bird to the forces of death and destruction. Did he end the conflict by playing the cello? No. But his enduring impact says that there is something that we can all do in the midst of despairing times. There are plenty of things that we can do, and there are things that we cannot change. But the reality is we act and we move out of hope because we don't want to be changed ourselves. The world needs no more cynics. What it needs is hopeful realists. Recognizing that our work might not make a difference, but we're going to do it anyway because we will not be changed. And if enough people do that, change will come. So we're called to act out in hope, hopeful action, to play our own music in the face of violence, to show up, to pray, to change our daily habits and decide that Easter isn't the end, but only the beginning, a chance for each one of us to live as defiant hopers. I think St. Augustine said it best when he talked about hope. This is the quote. Hope has two beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, and courage to see that they do not remain the way they are. That's our call. This is our story. The tomb is empty. The question is, what will we say with our lives? Live into this hope. Live as if. Live in defiance. Live in defiance of all the things in the world that would crush the human spirit wherever it shows up. Decide each and every day that you are going to flip the bird to the forces of death and destruction. And do it with a smile, based in the love of Jesus Christ. That went all the way to the cross and said, love's going to win.